Evening had just begun at the restaurant. The soft golden lights reflected on the polished tables, and the quiet sound of chatter floated through the air. Waiters moved quickly, their trays full of steaming plates, glasses, and smiles that hid their exhaustion. Among them was Emily, a young woman in her early 20s wearing a neat uniform and a calm, practiced smile. She looked like any other waitress doing her job, but there was something gentle and thoughtful in her eyes, something that made her stand out even when she said nothing. Emily had worked at this restaurant for almost a year. Every evening she came in before sunset, tied her apron tightly, and began preparing for another long night of service. She was good at her job, polite, efficient, and quiet. The regular customers liked her because she always remembered their favorite dishes and never forgot to ask about their day. But what no one knew, what she never talked about, was that deep inside her heart lived a musician, a pianist who once dreamed of concert halls and shining stages. In one corner of the restaurant stood a glossy black piano. It wasn't played often. It was mostly there for decoration. Sometimes a hired musician came on weekends, but on most nights the piano just sat there, silent and beautiful. Emily often passed by it as she carried trays from the kitchen to the tables. Every time she did, her eyes would drift toward the keys, those smooth ivory keys that had once been a part of her world. Her fingers would twitch slightly, as if they remembered the feel of them, as if they longed to play again. But she never stopped. She would simply keep walking, pretending it meant nothing. There was a time not too long ago when Emily's life was filled with music. She had started playing the piano when she was 6, her tiny hands barely able to reach an octave. Her parents used to say that she had music in her soul. She practiced every day, sometimes for hours, losing herself in melodies while the rest of the world faded away. By the time she was 16, she could play pieces that even adults found challenging. Her teacher used to call her a prodigy. Everyone believed she would have a bright future in music, but life doesn't always follow the rhythm we plan. When Emily was 18, her mother fell ill, a long, painful illness that required care, money, and time. Her father had already left years ago, and Emily was the only one her mother had. Slowly, one by one, her dreams began to fade. The piano lessons stopped first, then the competitions, then the university audition she had prepared for months. She never went. She sold her keyboard to help pay for medicine. And when her mother passed away, Emily found herself alone, with empty pockets and a heart full of unfinished songs. Now she worked at this restaurant, serving strangers and pretending to be fine. She didn't hate her job, but it wasn't her dream either. Some nights, when the restaurant was quiet, she would pause near the piano for a moment and let her thoughts wander. She would imagine herself playing again, maybe in front of people who listened, really listened, and understood what her music meant. Then someone would call her name and she'd hurry off to refill a glass or deliver a plate, her dream tucked away like a secret note in a forgotten melody. That evening, the restaurant was lively. A group of well-dressed business people laughed at a table near the center. A couple celebrated their anniversary by the window. The air smelled of roasted meat, fresh bread, and red wine. Emily moved gracefully between the tables, balancing plates and smiles. She didn't rush, but she never stopped moving either. Her coworkers liked her because she was dependable, the kind of person who quietly fixed problems before anyone noticed them. But under her calm face, Emily felt the familiar ache of something missing. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a soft emptiness, a quiet longing that stayed with her even when she laughed. She thought of music often, but it felt like another lifetime, as if that part of her had belonged to someone else. Sometimes she hummed softly while cleaning tables just to hear her own voice in the silence. No one paid much attention. People rarely do. When she had a few free minutes between orders, she stood near the corner where the piano rested. It looked majestic under the warm lights, its surface shining like black glass. Dust had gathered near the edges, and the sheet music on the stand was slightly yellowed with age. She reached out once, almost touching the keys, but then pulled her hand back quickly. What if someone saw her? What if they asked questions she didn't want to answer? The sound of laughter brought her back to reality. She smiled, picked up her tray, and returned to her work. But for the rest of the evening, she couldn't stop thinking about that piano. It was strange. She had walked past it hundreds of times before, but tonight it seemed to call her name softly, like a whisper from her past. As the night went on, the restaurant filled with voices, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of conversation. To everyone else, it was just another pleasant evening. But for Emily, something felt different. Like the air itself was holding a secret waiting to be discovered. She didn't know it yet, but this ordinary night, this quiet beginning, would soon become the start of something extraordinary. Because sometimes, even in the most ordinary places, magic waits just behind the sound of a simple note. After the dinner rush slowed down, the restaurant settled into a gentle calm. The clinking of silverware softened and the chatter faded into quiet conversations. Candles flickered on each table, their flames dancing softly in the low light. Emily carried a tray of empty glasses back to the counter and let out a small sigh of relief. For the first time in hours she could breathe. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked around. Everything was in its usual place. The couples leaning close over their meals, the laughter from a corner table, the waiters whispering quick jokes near the kitchen door. And then her eyes found it again, the piano. It sat near the window, half in shadow, half glowing under the warm amber lights. The lid was closed and the faint reflection of the restaurant shimmered on its surface. Emily stared at it longer than she meant to. The sight of it stirred something deep inside her, a mixture of warmth, ache, and nostalgia. She remembered another piano, a smaller one, in the living room of her old house. The one her mother bought second-hand when Emily was just a child. The memory came back so vividly, she could almost smell the faint scent of polish her mother used on the keys. Emily could see her younger self sitting on the worn wooden bench, feet dangling, fingers trying to find the right notes. Her mother would sit nearby with a cup of tea, listening with a soft smile. "Again, sweetheart," she would say whenever Emily missed a note. "Don't give up. Music doesn't come from your fingers. It comes from your heart." Back then, Emily believed her mother was the most patient person in the world. She used to think that as long as her mother listened, she would never be afraid of playing, no matter who else was in the room. As the memory played in her mind, Emily blinked, realizing she had been standing still too long. She shook her head gently and went back to wiping tables. But it was no use. Once the past starts whispering, it doesn't stop easily. She remembered her first recital at the community hall. She was 12, her hands shaking as she sat before a large piano that seemed much too big for her. The audience was filled with parents, teachers, and students all waiting quietly. But as soon as her fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. It was just her and the music and her safe place. When she finished, the applause felt like a wave that lifted her off the bench. She could still remember the way her mother's eyes glistened that night, pride and love shining together. Those were the days when Emily's world revolved around music. She practiced every morning before school and again after dinner. Her dream was clear: to become a professional pianist, to travel, to play on great stages, to let people feel what she felt every time she played. And for a while it even seemed possible. Her teachers praised her talent and she began preparing for auditions at a prestigious music conservatory. Then everything changed. It started with small things: her mother's tiredness, the frequent doctor visits, the growing pile of medical bills. Emily told herself she could handle both, her music and her mother's care. But reality has its own rhythm, and it often drowns out the melodies of dreams. The day came when she had to make a choice: stay home and take care of her mother or chase her dream alone. She never hesitated. She sold her piano. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Watching it leave the house felt like watching a part of herself being carried away. But she told herself it was only temporary, that she'd buy another one someday. She didn't. Her days became full of medicine schedules, bills, and part-time jobs. Music slowly slipped away like a song fading at the end of a record. When her mother passed away 2 years later, Emily was lost. The house was quiet, painfully quiet. She had no piano, no income, no direction. The only thing she had left was the habit of not giving up. That's what brought her to this restaurant, a job she never planned to have, in a life she never imagined living. Now, years later, as she looked at the piano in the corner of the restaurant, all those memories rose like ghosts. It wasn't regret she felt, not exactly. It was more like unfinished music, a melody that once began but never found its ending. A melody that once began but never found its ending. She walked toward the piano, pretending to straighten a napkin on the nearby table. Up close, she could see the faint scratches on its polished surface, the dust along the lid, the little chips on the edges of the keys. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. Her reflection appeared faintly on the piano surface. A young woman in a waitress's uniform, hair tied neatly, eyes tired but curious. For a moment she didn't see the waitress. She saw the girl she used to be, the dreamer, the pianist, the child who believed that music could change the world. Her hand lifted slowly, almost without her realizing it. Her fingers hovered just above the keys, trembling. Then she stopped. The sound of someone calling her name broke the spell. "Emily, table 4 needs water." She turned quickly, forcing a small smile. "Coming." As she walked away, she felt her heartbeat quicken, not from rushing, but from something deeper, something awakening inside her. She didn't know why, but the piano felt different tonight. It was as if it had been waiting for her. And somewhere inside she felt a quiet voice, the same one that used to whisper to her when she was a little girl practicing in her living room. "Play again," it said. "Just once more." Emily shook her head, trying to ignore it, but the thought stayed with her the rest of the evening. She didn't know it yet, but soon that soft whisper from the past would turn into music that would change everything. The next evening arrived quietly, just like any other night. The restaurant filled up with soft music from the speakers, the smell of roasted garlic and butter drifting through the air. Candles flickered on every table, their small flames glowing against the golden walls. Emily came in early, tying her apron and pinning her hair back neatly, ready for another long shift. She told herself it would be an ordinary evening, just like all the others. But deep down she could still feel the piano calling to her. Ever since last night she couldn't stop thinking about it. Even while making her morning tea, her fingers had moved unconsciously, tapping imaginary keys on the table. She'd smiled at herself, shaking her head. "Stop dreaming, Emily," she whispered. "Those days are over. But dreams have their own stubborn rhythm, and some never stop humming quietly in the heart." As the night grew busier, the restaurant buzzed with laughter and conversation. A group of 6 people entered, friends or co-workers, maybe both, dressed in suits and elegant dresses. They were clearly celebrating something. Emily guided them to a round table near the center, the one closest to the piano. She greeted them with her usual warm smile, took their drink orders, and hurried off to the bar. When she returned, she noticed one of the men at the table pointing toward the piano. "That's a real one, right?" he asked her with an amused grin. "Does anyone actually play it?" Emily smiled politely. "Not usually, sir. It's mostly for decoration unless the restaurant hires a musician." "A shame," he said, swirling his glass of wine. "It looks lonely." The others laughed softly, agreeing. One of the women turned to Emily and asked, "Do you play?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat. "I used to," she said quickly, almost under her breath. "A long time ago." The woman's eyes brightened. "Really? Then you must play something for us." "Oh no, I couldn't," Emily said, shaking her head, her cheeks warming. "It's been years." But the group didn't stop. They clapped and cheered playfully, insisting it would be fun, that she shouldn't be shy. Her face turned red, and she laughed nervously, unsure what to say. Her manager passed by at that moment and paused. "What's going on here?" he asked with a friendly smile. "She used to play piano," one of the men said cheerfully. "We were hoping she'd give us a little concert." Emily's eyes widened. "Oh no, really, it's nothing." Her manager looked at her, amused but curious. "Is that true, Emily? You play?" "I used to," she said softly. He grinned. "Well, why not give it a try? It's a slow night. A little music might be nice for the guests." Emily froze. Everyone was watching her now. She felt her stomach twist with nervousness. Her hands, which had carried heavy trays and poured countless glasses without shaking, suddenly felt weak. "I don't know if I remember anything," she said with a small laugh, hoping that would be enough to make them drop the idea. But instead, they encouraged her even more. "Come on. Just one song. We won't judge." Their laughter was kind, but it made her heart pound faster. The piano, the very thing she had been avoiding all this time, now stood waiting for her, just a few steps away. Her manager gave her a small nod. "Go on, Emily, just for a minute." She hesitated. Her breath felt shallow. Part of her wanted to say no, to walk away, to stay safe in her quiet routine. But another part of her, the old part, the one that used to believe in music, whispered softly, "You can do this." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. Then, without fully understanding why, she took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter with every step. The laughter dimmed, the chatter softened, and even the clinking of glasses seemed to fade. The group at the table turned their chairs toward her, smiling with interest. The other diners noticed too, whispering curiously. Emily reached the piano and stood there for a long moment, staring at the keys. Her reflection looked back at her in the glossy black surface. A waitress, not a pianist. She felt out of place, like a stranger standing on the edge of an old dream. She pulled out the piano bench slowly and sat down. The leather seat felt cold beneath her. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They felt smooth and familiar, a touch from another lifetime. For a few seconds she just sat there frozen, unsure where to begin. Then, almost instinctively, she started to play. The first notes were simple, a tune she used to play as a child, soft and hesitant, almost like testing the waters of memory. The sound floated gently through the restaurant, fragile but pure. A few people turned their heads. The noise in the room lowered even more. Her fingers stumbled once, then found the rhythm again. The melody was small, quiet, just a gentle waltz she remembered from years ago. She could feel her heart in every note, her nervousness mixing with something sweet and familiar. The guests smiled, some swaying slightly in their seats. Her co-workers peeked from the kitchen doorway, surprised, and for the first time in years, Emily felt something spark inside her, a warmth that started in her chest and spread through her fingertips. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was the girl who used to fill her home with music. As she reached the end of the simple tune, the restaurant stayed silent for a heartbeat, and then soft applause began to fill the air. The group cheered lightly, clinking their glasses in delight. Emily smiled shyly and stood up, her heart racing but full. It was only a simple tune, just a few minutes of music, but it was enough to wake something that had been asleep for too long, and deep inside she felt it, the quiet, certain pull that this was only the beginning. For a few seconds after the applause, Emily sat perfectly still. Her hands rested on her lap, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. The sound of clapping felt far away, like an echo she couldn't quite believe was real. She had just played, after all these years. And though it was only a simple tune, it felt like she had just reopened a door she'd locked long ago. The guests smiled warmly at her. "That was beautiful," one of the women said. Emily blushed, shaking her head. "Oh, that was nothing. I just remembered a little." But even as she said it, her heart whispered something else. "You remember more than you think." Her manager gave her a nod of approval before walking off with a grin. The moment passed and Emily quickly returned to her duties, clearing tables and taking new orders. But the feeling didn't fade. Her hands still tingled with the memory of the keys, and her mind buzzed with a mix of nerves and excitement. Every time she glanced at the piano, her chest filled with warmth. It was as if her music, the part of her that she thought was gone, had been waiting patiently all these years for her to return. Hours later, the restaurant quieted down. The crowd thinned, and the music from the speakers slowed to a soft background tune. Emily stood by the counter, wiping glasses while humming under her breath. The same melody she had played earlier. The tune flowed out naturally, as if it had never left her. One of her co-workers, Sarah, noticed. "You were amazing tonight, you know," she said with a grin. "Didn't know we had a secret musician among us." Emily laughed softly, embarrassed. "It's been forever since I played seriously." "Well, you should do it more often," Sarah said. "People loved it. You made the whole place go quiet, like magic." Magic. That word stayed in Emily's mind long after her shift ended. When the restaurant finally closed, she was one of the last to leave. She turned off the lights in the dining area and walked slowly toward the piano. The soft glow from the street lamps outside shone through the windows, bathing the piano in silvery light. The air felt different, calm, but expectant. She reached out and brushed her fingers across the surface, leaving faint streaks in the dust. For a moment she hesitated, unsure whether to open the lid again. But her heart pushed her forward. She sat down, feeling the same chill of the bench beneath her, and slowly lifted the fallboard to reveal the ivory keys. The room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Emily took a deep breath and placed her fingers gently on the keyboard. This time, she didn't play the simple tune she had played earlier. She just pressed a few random keys, listening to the notes fade into the stillness. The sound filled her with a strange comfort, familiar like coming home. Then something inside her stirred. Almost without thinking, her fingers began to move again, soft, slow, searching. It wasn't a song she remembered. It was something new, something born right in that moment. The melody flowed like water, uncertain at first, then stronger, fuller, more alive. The sound grew richer, each note weaving into the next like a secret story being told. She closed her eyes, letting her heart guide her hands. Her breathing matched the rhythm. The world outside seemed to disappear. There was no restaurant, no customers, no waitressing, just Emily and her music. It was a song of memory and hope, of everything she had lost and everything she still carried inside. Every note seemed to speak about her mother's gentle smile, the lonely nights she spent dreaming of a life she couldn't have, the small victories she never celebrated. The melody swelled, filling the empty restaurant with warmth and emotion. The notes seemed to glow in the air. The music wasn't perfect. She missed a few keys. Her timing wavered, but it was real, honest, alive. Unbeknownst to her, a few people were still lingering near the door, the cleaning staff, a couple finishing their wine. They stopped and turned to listen. Slowly, the quiet restaurant began to transform. The harsh clatter of dishes and chatter disappeared. In its place was something peaceful and powerful. One of the guests whispered, "That's her, the waitress from earlier." Emily didn't notice. She was lost in her own world now, the music pouring out like it had been waiting years to be heard. Her fingers danced with growing confidence, creating waves of sound that shimmered through the air. As the final notes faded, she opened her eyes. The room was still. For a moment she thought she was alone, until she heard the soft sound of clapping again. She turned and saw a few people standing by the door, their faces calm but moved. One man had tears in his eyes. Another smiled gently and said, "That was incredible." Emily's cheeks flushed. "Oh, I didn't know anyone was still here," she said shyly. "That," the man said softly, "was more than just playing. That was feeling." She smiled awkwardly, thanked them, and stood up, closing the piano slowly. But as she walked to the back to collect her things, she felt something different inside her. A spark that had been missing for so long. That night, when she got home, she sat on her small couch, her hands still tingling as if the music hadn't ended. For years she had hidden that part of herself, believing it no longer mattered. But now she knew it had never left her. It had only been waiting for her to find it again. And though she didn't know it yet, what began as a quiet tune in an almost empty restaurant was only the start of a melody that would soon touch every heart in the room. The next evening came quietly, but something in the air felt different. The restaurant looked the same candles, the same polished tables, the same hum of quiet conversations. Yet for Emily, everything seemed sharper, brighter. Ever since she played that night, something inside her had changed. It was small, like a spark, but she could feel it growing with every passing hour. When she walked past the piano, her eyes lingered a little longer than usual. She smiled softly to herself before hurrying away to take orders. The guests were cheerful tonight, a mix of regulars and new faces. Among them, the same group from the night before had returned. The man who first encouraged her to play waved and said, "Our star pianist is here again." Emily laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just your waitress tonight," she said playfully. "Not for long," one of them replied with a wink. "We're hoping for another song after dinner." She smiled but didn't answer. Her heart, however, gave a tiny leap. As the evening went on, she worked quietly but couldn't ignore the growing feeling inside her, that pull toward the piano. Every time she passed by, she felt it calling. The restaurant was filled with warmth, laughter, and light chatter. But beneath it all, she could sense a rhythm, like her heart beating in time with something bigger. Near the end of the night, her manager approached. "They're asking again," he said with a grin. "Think you can give them one more performance?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know if I should. It's been so long." "Last night the entire room went silent," he said softly. "That doesn't happen often. Maybe you should do it again for yourself this time." His words stayed with her. She looked around, people laughing, sipping wine, enjoying the glow of the evening. And then she looked at the piano again, shining softly under the lights, waiting. Her hands felt warm. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from something closer to longing. She walked over slowly, and one by one the sounds of the restaurant began to quiet. Conversations dimmed, forks paused midair, and curious eyes followed her as she sat down at the piano. She took a deep breath. The air was heavy with anticipation. The group who had asked her smiled encouragingly. Her manager nodded from across the room. Emily placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment she hesitated, then began to play. At first the melody was soft, familiar, like the one she played before. But something inside her shifted. Her fingers, almost on their own, started to move differently, faster, braver, freer. The notes became richer, deeper, full of emotion. The room began to change. The low murmur of the restaurant faded completely. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Every sound in the room seemed to bow down to her music. Emily closed her eyes, letting the melody take her wherever it wanted to go. It wasn't a song she planned. It came from her heart, from memories that still lived inside her. Her mother's laughter, her childhood dreams, the years she spent hiding this part of herself. The music carried it all. The simple tune transformed into something powerful, a piece that told her whole story without a single word. It rose and fell like waves, soft one moment and strong the next. Every note glowed with emotion. The people listening felt it. They didn't just hear her music. They felt her and her pain, her joy, her courage. The guests who had been chatting moments ago now sat still, eyes wide, wine forgotten. Some leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. A woman near the back had tears shining in her eyes. The melody swirled through the air, filling every corner of the room. It was no longer background music. It was alive, breathing, pulsing, reaching everyone. For Emily, time disappeared. She didn't know how long she had been playing. She wasn't thinking about technique or perfection. She was simply telling her story through the piano. And in that moment she felt weightless, free from everything that had held her back. When the last note finally came, she let it linger. A soft, trembling sound that faded slowly into silence. Her hands fell still. Her chest rose and fell as she caught her breath. The silence that followed was deep, a silence so full it seemed to hum. Then, like a wave breaking, the applause came. Loud, strong, heartfelt. People stood up, clapping with smiles, some even cheering. Emily blinked in surprise, overwhelmed. Her eyes glistened as she looked around the room. The same people she had been serving moments ago now looked at her differently, not as a waitress but as an artist. Her manager clapped too, his face full of pride. "I think," he said loudly over the noise, "we found our new Saturday night performer." The guests laughed and clapped even harder. Emily laughed through tears, shaking her head. "Oh no, But she couldn't finish the sentence, because deep down she knew the truth. She wasn't just anything. She was a musician who had finally found her voice again. As she stood and bowed slightly, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She didn't know where this would lead, but she knew one thing. She wanted to play again. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the mood had changed. People spoke softly now, still touched by what they had heard. The piano sat quietly again, but its silence felt different, not empty anymore, but full of promise. And Emily, standing behind the counter later that night, smiled to herself. Her fingers still tingled. Her heart was still singing. It was supposed to be just another shift, just another night at work. But her music had turned it into something unforgettable, for everyone in the room, and for her most of all. For the rest of the evening, the restaurant seemed to float in a soft, glowing silence, the kind that lingers after something magical has happened. People spoke in quiet voices as if afraid to disturb the feeling left behind by Emily's music. The air still carried the warmth of her melody, and even the candles seemed to burn a little steadier, their light trembling with memory. Emily, still behind the counter, tried to return to her duties. But her hand shook slightly each time she picked up a glass. She could feel people's eyes on her, kind eyes, smiling eyes, full of admiration. Guests who had hardly noticed her before now greeted her warmly as she passed by. "That was beautiful," said a woman at one table. "You have a gift." "Thank you," Emily replied shyly, her cheeks pink. She didn't know what else to say. The same group who had asked her to play again were still sitting near the piano. They were quieter now, their earlier laughter replaced by a kind of gentle awe. One of them, the man who had first encouraged her, raised his glass toward her when their eyes met. "You changed the whole room tonight," he said softly. "You changed the whole room tonight," he said softly. Could this really be a chance? Could she actually start over? Not just as a waitress who played a tune, but as a musician again? The idea scared her as much as it thrilled her. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if this was just luck, just one beautiful night that couldn't be repeated? She looked over at the piano, glowing faintly under the last bit of light. It seemed to wait for her answer. Finally, she took a deep breath and smiled. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see where this goes." As she slipped the card safely into her bag, she felt the same flutter in her chest that she used to feel before every recital, a mix of fear and joy and hope. On her way out, she touched the piano once more, lightly brushing her fingers across the keys. The sound was soft, but it filled her with courage. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Emily walked home with her head high, her heart steady, her future beginning to hum like a new song she couldn't wait to learn. That night, when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed not of the past, but of a stage, bright lights and a piano waiting for her, its keys shining like stars. And for the first time in years, Emily's dreams didn't feel impossible. They felt close, just one song away. Days passed, but the magic of that evening refused to fade. The soft glow of applause, the warmth of the people's faces, and the feeling of her fingers gliding over the piano keys all stayed with Emily like a song that wouldn't leave her heart. Each morning, she woke up with new energy. The tired waitress who used to drag herself out of bed was gone. In her place was someone lighter, someone hopeful. Music was back in her life, not as a dream from the past, but as something real, breathing, waiting for her every day. The little business card from the producer, Jonathan Pierce, sat on her bedside table. She looked at it every morning but hadn't yet found the courage to call. It wasn't fear of rejection. It was something deeper. The quiet uncertainty of stepping back into a world she thought she had lost forever. One afternoon, while getting ready for work, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked brighter, her smile surer. She thought about her mother, the woman who used to sit beside her as she practiced, the one who always said, "Music will take you where you belong." Emily took a deep breath, picked up her phone and dialed the number. The call was short, but it changed everything. Jonathan's voice was warm, confident, and kind. He told her he had been in the restaurant that night by chance. He hadn't expected to hear anything special, but her music had stopped him in his tracks. "It wasn't just your playing," he said. "It was the feeling behind it. That's what real music is." He invited her to visit his small studio the following week, just to talk, maybe play a little. Emily's hands trembled as she thanked him. After hanging up, she stood in her small kitchen, heart pounding, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in years, she wasn't just remembering her dream, she was living it again. The next few days felt like a blur of excitement and nerves. Between her restaurant shifts, she practiced quietly on an old keyboard she had borrowed from a neighbor. The keys were stiff and missing notes, but it didn't matter. She played anyway, slow at first, then faster, losing herself in melodies. When the day finally came, she dressed simply but neatly, her heart thudding with each step toward the studio. It was a cozy space. Instruments, cables, soft light, and that unmistakable smell of creativity in the air. Jonathan greeted her warmly. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I've been looking forward to hearing you play again." Emily smiled nervously. "I hope I don't disappoint." "You won't," he said, gesturing to a piano in the corner. Just play whatever comes to you. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the rest of the world disappeared, the same way it had in the restaurant that night. The melody flowed effortlessly, gentle and honest. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Jonathan listened silently, arms crossed, eyes focused, the faintest smile on his face. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then he spoke softly. "You have something special, Emily, not everyone does. You play like you're telling a story, one that people want to hear." Tears welled in her eyes. "I stopped playing for a long time," she admitted. "I thought that part of me was gone." He shook his head. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. That simple sentence felt like a key unlocking something inside her. She smiled through her tears. "I want to keep playing," she said. "Not just for myself anymore, for people who need to feel what I feel." "Then let's make that happen," Jonathan said with a grin. Over the next few weeks, Emily's life changed slowly, beautifully. She still worked at the restaurant, but now every Friday evening she played for the guests. The tables would fill, the lights would dim, and when her fingers touched the keys, the whole room would fall silent, just like before. Word began to spread. People came not only for the food, but for the waitress who played like she was painting emotions with sound. Strangers would approach her after her performances, thanking her for making them feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. And in the midst of it all, she started visiting the studio regularly, recording her first few pieces, not for fame, not for money, but simply to share her story through her music. Sometimes, late at night after closing the restaurant, Emily would sit alone by the piano, playing softly to the empty room. The candles would flicker, and she'd imagine her mother there, listening like she always used to. One night she whispered, "You were right, Mom. Music did take me where I belong." Her eyes glistened, but her heart was at peace. Outside, the city buzzed quietly, cars passing, people laughing, life continuing. But inside that warm little restaurant, a dream that had once been broken was whole again. The girl who once served tables now served something greater. Hope, beauty, and emotion, all through her fingertips. And as the final note of her song faded into the night, Emily smiled, knowing this was not the end of her story. It was, at last, her true beginning. Emily smiled, feeling both proud and overwhelmed. "I just played," she said. "No," he replied with a shake of his head. "You didn't just play. You spoke." Those words stayed with her, echoing in her mind as she walked back to the kitchen. You spoke. She had never thought of it that way before, but he was right. For the first time in years, she had truly spoken. Not with words, but with her heart. In the kitchen, her co-workers surrounded her with excitement. Sarah, the young waitress she often worked with, nearly squealed. "Emily, that was incredible." "Everyone's talking about you." Emily laughed nervously. "I was so nervous I thought my hands would shake right off." "Well, they didn't," Sarah said with a grin. "You made grown men cry out there." Emily blushed. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did," said the chef from behind the counter, smiling as he stirred a pot. "Even I stopped cooking for a minute." "That never happens," the others laughed. Emily did too, though her heart was full to the brim. She didn't play for praise. She had only wanted to feel the music again. But the idea that it had touched others made her chest ache in the best way possible. When she stepped out again, the restaurant was beginning to clear. Couples were paying bills, saying their goodnights, but there was still a soft buzz in the air. The group who had started it all lingered by the piano, reluctant to leave. One of the women approached her, a kind expression on her face. "You know," she said, "music like that doesn't come from training alone. It comes from living. You made us feel something tonight." "That's rare." Emily looked down, smiling. "Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone would even listen." "Oh, we listen," the woman said, "and we'll be back." They left with cheerful waves, and soon the restaurant grew quiet again. The last guests left, the lights dimmed, and the staff began cleaning up. Emily walked slowly back to the piano. It looked peaceful now, like it too had played its heart out and was resting. She sat on the bench again, running her hand along the smooth surface of the keys. Her reflection looked back at her, tired but glowing. For a long moment she just sat there thinking. About her mother. About the years she had spent running from music because it reminded her of loss. About how one simple tune had brought her back to herself. Her eyes stung slightly and she laughed under her breath. "You'd probably tell me to keep going, wouldn't you, Mom?" she whispered softly. She imagined her mother's warm smile, her gentle voice saying, "Always." She pressed one key. Just one. The soft note rang out, echoing faintly through the empty room. It sounded lonely and beautiful at the same time. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Emily turned and saw her manager standing near the door. "You were amazing tonight," he said quietly. "Really?" "Thank you," she said. He smiled. "You know, one of the guests asked for your name. He said he works with local musicians. Maybe you should talk to him tomorrow." Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. "Oh, I don't know. I just play for fun," he shrugged. "Maybe, but sometimes fun turns into something more." After he left, Emily sat there for a while longer. The restaurant lights dimmed further, the last flickers of the candles fading one by one. But inside her, something was glowing brighter than ever, a quiet, steady light. When she finally stood to leave, she looked back at the piano one last time. The sight of it no longer made her sad. Instead, it filled her with hope. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh. She walked home slowly, her steps light, her heart still humming with the melody she had played. It followed her through the quiet streets like a companion. That night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't sleep right away. Her fingers tingled with memory, her mind replaying the music again and again. But this time, it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. The applause, the smiles, the words, "You spoke." They all blended into one soft truth that wrapped around her like a blanket. She had found her way back to music, and music had found its way back to her. And though the restaurant had gone dark, in Emily's world a new light had just begun to shine. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Emily's small apartment window, landing softly across her face. For a moment she didn't move. She lay still, eyes half open, replaying the sound of last night's music in her mind. The melody, the applause, the way her heart had felt so alive again. It didn't feel like a dream, though it easily could have been. She smiled faintly, staring at the ceiling. The air felt different, lighter somehow. The tiredness she usually woke up with was gone. In its place was a quiet energy, a sense that something had shifted. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, she was excited just to see where the day would lead. As she got ready for work, she caught herself humming the same tune she had played. Her reflection in the mirror looked brighter, her eyes softer, her smile more real. "You did it," she whispered to herself, a little disbelieving. "You actually played again." When she arrived at the restaurant, the staff greeted her with cheers and teasing applause. Sarah clapped her hands dramatically. "Look who's here, the star of the show." Emily laughed, covering her face. "Please don't start that again." "Oh, it's too late," Sarah said. "You're famous now. Everyone's been talking about you since last night." Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen and waved a wooden spoon. "Play something again tonight," he said with a grin. "Makes the food taste better." Emily rolled her eyes but smiled. Their laughter filled the space with warmth, and for once she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like she belonged. Later that afternoon, while arranging silverware on the tables, her manager approached. He had that same knowing smile from the night before. "Hey, Emily, got a minute?" She nodded, curious. He handed her a small business card. "One of the guests from last night came by earlier. He asked me to give this to you." Emily looked down at the card. It was simple, white with neat black lettering. Jonathan Pierce, music producer. Below it was a phone number and a note written in careful handwriting. "Your music moved me. Please call when you can." Emily's breath caught for a second. "He's a producer?" Her manager nodded. "Seems like it. Said he works with local musicians. I think he meant it when he said he was impressed." She stared at the card for a long moment. It felt unreal, like holding a piece of another world in her hand. "I don't know," she murmured half to herself. "I haven't played properly in years." "Then maybe it's time to start again," her manager said gently. "You've got something special, Emily. Everyone felt it last night, even me." She smiled, touched. "Thank you." For the rest of the day, her thoughts kept drifting back to the card. Every time she placed it back in her apron pocket, she felt its presence, small but full of possibility. That evening, when the restaurant got busy again, People still talked about the waitress who played the piano. Some had even come back hoping to hear her again. Emily blushed each time someone mentioned it. A few asked, "Will you be playing tonight?" Maybe later, she thought. Maybe. When the rush was over and the night grew calm, she stood near the piano again. The candles flickered and the same peaceful stillness filled the air. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. She didn't plan to play, but her heart had other ideas. She sat down quietly and began to play. Not for an audience this time, but for herself. The melody flowed gently, soft and full of peace. It wasn't as grand as the night before, but it was warm and alive. A few guests turned to listen, but Emily barely noticed. Her eyes were half closed, her smile faint but sure. Each note felt like a heartbeat, steady and certain. When she finished, the room stayed silent for a few moments, then a few soft claps echoed through the space. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Her manager, standing by the bar, caught her eye and smiled. "You were meant for this," he mouthed. Later, after closing time, Emily sat alone at one of the tables, holding the producer's card again. The restaurant was quiet, the lights dim. She traced the letters with her thumb, thinking about what it could mean. With her thumb, thinking about what it could mean.